You're listening to Pardon the Disruption with your host, Tom Young.
Hi, this is Tom Young. Welcome to our show. Let's go around the room and introduce ourselves.
Hey, this is Bart Gallo.
This is TJ Young.
This is Rohan Kapoor.
Great. Hey, thanks, guys. Hey, today we're going to talk about, in our disruption series, winners and losers, and what happens when all this disruption from digital technologies get implemented in society and businesses and our lives that we live. You know, who wins and who loses. So it's a pretty controversial subject, something we're probably not going to get through in a 20, 30-minute podcast. But we are, Rohan, doing a meetup later in the month in New York on this topic.
Yeah, really excited. So next Wednesday, we're going to be doing a topic, it'd be the 23rd of Jan in New York, talking about this very topic. We've got a really cool guest speaker, Rob High, who's the CTO for IBM Watson, coming along, and we're having a discussion about it because I think it couldn't be more topical, and it also couldn't be more controversial. People need to people need to realize and open their eyes that this is happening. This isn't something that's like 20, 30, 40 years away. It's happening now. And they need to be aware of this topic. And that's kind of why we wanted to bring it to the fore, both in the podcast and the meetup next week. We've got Davos coming around the corner. We were talking about it, 22nd. So the World Economic Forum, they host an annual event, Davos in Switzerland. All the world's business leaders attend, some really powerful people in the room, and the theme that they're talking about is...
We're not going to talk about the Bilderbergers, are we?
No.
I think they're meeting down the street.
That's more exclusive.
That's way more exclusive than this. They'd love to be at that. This is a hot topic for them as well, as it should be. So, there's a lot of change going on, and people need to face up to that.
I was introduced to the notion that, for one, I would say a common paradigm that people have is that progress and technology creates a general uplift. And I think there's a lot of truth to that as we think about it from an incrementalism perspective, that it's hard to argue that technology hasn't improved our lives. And so in that sense, you could have a paradigm that says we're all winners. And so I think even introducing the notion that there are winners and losers here opens up people's ideas that there might be something beyond just a general good improvement of general welfare. And so this goes back to the Luddites, and even goes back before then, where people viewed technology as a threat to their existence, so whether it be their job, that could be their livelihood, how they interact with people. You hear today, people say, well, my kids are on their phones all the time, they don't pay attention. Yeah. We talked about that a lot.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think obviously, so in this debate, there's two sides of the argument. One is that all of this new technological change is going to be it's going to create jobs elsewhere. The other side of that argument is that with all of this advancement in technology, that's automating a lot of the jobs that humans used to perform, that there's not going to be that same job creation elsewhere. And I think part of the problem is that I'm of the belief that there is obviously going to be job creation, but those jobs are going to be created in areas such as data science. And I don't think you have to be a data scientist to compete and win in this new economy and new jobs, but you definitely have to be data literate. And even getting to that point for a lot of people is going to be a really big challenge. So
that really is the argument with economists. They say, oh, there's going to be all new jobs created. And there's no doubt that new jobs are going to be created from all this. The issue is the algebra of those new jobs. How many of them? Where are they relative to the jobs that are displaced? So, for example, let's use an analog intervention like the steam shovel. We don't have people digging ditches by hand anymore. Machine does it. But you need a machine operator. You need people to build the machines, service the machines, take care of it, prep the site. And the people who used to dig ditches are now doing something else. And so the issue gets to the notion of the timing of the displacement and the algebra of the job loss and job creation. So TJ and Bart, you guys just got off a project where you did quite a bit of automation deployments in a white collar environment. You had some people embrace it and some people were a little hostile to it. Is that fair?
Yeah, I think the initial response to it is, hey, I'm losing a portion of my job and I'm losing a portion of my, in turn, relevance to the company. The ones who really embraced it saw that if they were the ones championing that work, then they are showing, upper management, their direct supervisors in the company overall that they are thinking ahead and that they're looking to kind of drive benefits for the company beyond just saying, hey, keep me working here. So they were able to do more with less, essentially, or do more of the same, to be honest. If their same kind of work process was automated afterwards, it's really doing the same, but I can do more because I have these, quote unquote bots working for me. But just back to the winners versus losers, I think it's not really an or discussion, right? There's going to be both. Mm-hmm. But the question is, will there be more of one, and how lopsided will that be?
Right. I think the shock with the winners versus losers discussion, and to kind of tie it to some of the responses we saw to the automation project that we worked on, was I think a lot of people who are casually following automation think of this coming wave of new labor technologies as almost like a follow-up wave to the physical automation trend that happened, decades ago and has been going on. And I think maybe some people don't see that a lot of the jobs that are going to be affected are routine work that happens in a software ecosystem, and it's not necessarily someone who works a physical repetitive job who's going to be the only person impacted by this.
And the question is, it's not just the fact of automation displacing you too. I mean, that's one huge force that's pushing this discussion, but it's also just different ways to satisfy the need, right? So we did a lot of work for call centers to make them operate more efficiently. And you could say, hey, a script could run there to make it more efficient, or maybe that person sees a threat of another person that's working there that's a bit more efficient than them, another human. But we're seeing, I think that this conversation is really above just automation. It's about quote unquote digital, right? So one of the digital trends we're seeing is more richer user experiences and rich UIs being developed so that people can service themselves. Really, just the way that Amazon's developed, right? So how often do you call the service center for Amazon? How often do you call it call center? Almost never.
I had a chat once, and it was a great experience, and I hope I never have to do it again.
So the example here is, traditional models for the call center. People call when they have an issue. What's better than that? Give them the tools themselves so they can solve their own problems.
Right. Well, you can't lead with something like automation because you should be thinking about the problem and what's the solution for it, and maybe automation is involved in that. Right. Maybe it's some other technology, or maybe do we even have to do this anymore?
Exactly.
Maybe not.
Some of these digital platforms enable the end consumer or customer
self-service,
and will eliminate some of this work in the first place. So it's not just, we talk a lot about better, faster, cheaper, but just think about how all these digital tools, not just automation, are advancing to change the way that a service is run entirely.
Right.
And is that a threat to you, and how can you adapt because of that?
So do you think people will fall into three buckets almost once this change does take hold and jobs do get displaced? It's almost like the people that have the attitude and aptitude to adapt, and they will, and they'll succeed. There's people that have one or the other that will kind of fall in this like middle area where maybe they just don't push themselves and not ambitious enough to change, whatever it may be, and they'll kind of sit in the middle where they could either take either side. And then there's a whole huge bucket of people that just would not have the ability to pick up a job in this new digital revolution that's taking place.
Well, that's the controversial part of this.
Yeah.
I was at a conference in Palo Alto with a lot of thought leaders in the industry, a lot of Silicon Valley types there. And this is, I want to say, two and a half years ago. And we were debating this topic. In fact, there was winners and losers, and some people were saying, "Well, we're going to create a whole bunch of great new jobs for people." And we're trying to say, "Well, what are those jobs?" You could say data science and engineering types. And one of the guys raised his hand. He said, "I want to remind everybody that half the people have an IQ of 100 or less." and the room was like silent for like 10 seconds, which was a long time in that room. And it reminded people that this is, when you think of the automation, physical automation, like with steam shovels and the assembly line, you're automating muscle work. And people pivoted to starting using their brains more to participate in the economy. What digital is doing is replacing, it's in a broad sense, brain work. And when you replace that, you have to say, well, what's after that? I would argue it's things like conceptual things that require things that are outside of what we consider AI and digital technology is good at. But to me, the algebra is going to be off. There are going to be a lot of winners, but probably more losers.
Well, the question is, if the work is changing and the jobs are changing, there's going to be different roles in the future that are relevant. So we have to ask, well, is it a safe assumption to make that, those jobs will be more advanced, which meaning, the people on the low end of that IQ curve won't be able to adjust. So the adjustment issue is one thing, but do they have the capacity to adjust? Are those jobs inherently more difficult to perform or more difficult to learn the skills needed to perform well? Right? Or you can make the argument that these technologies, automating at this base layer of, low, repetitive, low effort tasks, maybe they are eliminating some of the barriers to entry to more advanced skill sets if you're able to learn how to use these tools. And maybe learning to use those tools to do more of that menial work that's tedious is easier than learning some of those initial workflows in the beginning.
So, Ron, you said 3 types of people. So think of it this way. There's people who make things happen. There are people who watch things happen. And then there's people who say, what happened? Right? I would say the losers are in that third category. People who aren't paying attention to what's happening, and they're assuming that tomorrow looks like yesterday. And that'll be true for the next few days, metaphorically. But then it won't.
That's true.
And so you have to at least put yourself in the second category, which is to watch things happen. That's the purpose of this podcast. It's the purpose of the work we do, our meetups, the book that's coming out this spring. And to educate people so that they can at least watch what's happening. Now, we would also encourage people to step up into the realm and start making things happen, because we know if we want to focus on the winner side of this, the people we've worked with who've embraced this change have, with their own jobs and their corporations, increased their compensation, their responsibilities significantly. Is that fair? Bart, you and TJ work with these guys.
Absolutely.
The ones that embrace it, you get out-of-cycle raises, moving up, promoted, et cetera.
Rapidly.
Well, if you can show you can adapt, then you can show that you can take on more, I think, inherently.
Yeah.
And then you are not as prone to obsolescence.
So anyway, I was introduced to this concept. Martin Ford wrote a book called Lights in the Tunnel. And I had to look up when he wrote the book because it was some time ago, but I was surprised to see that it was 10 years ago. And his book sat on the shelf and was not really widely read for about 2 or 3 years. And then it started to get picked up around 2012 and 13 in the circles that I work in. I read the book along with some of the other people in the industry, and we're saying, wow, this is pretty interesting. The guy had a really insightful point of view as to why losers get created here disproportionately than prior innovations. And it had to do with the fact that digital technologies don't require people in the supply chain to perform the end-to-end service. And as a result, less people are employed, and wealth is concentrated to the owners of digital production. And if you look at something like Instagram, like Facebook, like Netflix, these are firms that have very high valuations and don't have a lot of employees. If you look at Uber, it's the same thing. They have very few employees. Their drivers aren't employees, by the way. They're just contract labor that are paid by the drink. But the actual number of employees is very low relative to so the people who own Uber are uber wealthy. And so you see this wealth concentration that you didn't see going back to, say, at the height of Industrial Revolution with the Ford auto plants, where Henry Ford paid his people very well, created the middle class in the Detroit area back in the 1920s to the 1950s. Those people could buy a house, they could send their kids to college and enjoy the classic American dream middle class life. That's very difficult today when you think of, people in the middle of the curve or on the bottom side of the middle of the curve. I think they're struggling today.
So for people listening to this podcast, the younger crowd growing up in this time, I feel are better equipped for it because they've grown up with technology. They're going to, I think a lot more of them are tech savvy and they're also aware of what's happening. So what they study has a bit more relevance, I think, and that's starting to change. There's more investment, like MIT are investing in teaching these new technologies. So I think for them, it's probably going to be fine. For the middle gap where perhaps they went into industries that were about to or going through this big shift, now they might be listening to this thinking, okay, I agree, I see it happening, but maybe it's difficult for them to think about like, how do I move to a place where I can sit on the winner side, if you like, of this conversation? What would be the advice for how someone caught in that middle transition period should be thinking about going after, trying to learn about and position themselves?
It's actually when we screen people to be on our team, mm-hmm. we look for the two criteria, which is attitude and aptitude. So attitude is really a choice, and the attitude that you need is the attitude to be able to embrace change, to participate in it versus fight it, to be willing to learn new things, work hard, have fun, all the things that would be an ingredient for success. But then you have to have the aptitude, which is the second critical component. And this is where honesty is required. Not everybody has the aptitude at all levels of the digital agenda. That's not to say there aren't places that people can participate in. But I think it's important in our society where there's a lot of blowing smoke and false self-esteem created by platitudes given to people. I think here's a case where you really need honesty around your aptitude so you know where to put your focus and attention.
I think that's a key point because there's a lot of different entry points here, right? Mm-hmm. It's not just the engineering, data science roles. There's a lot of ethical debate going about. There's a lot of policy setting, both in companies and at government level. There's a lot of different entry points that people can kind of go into.
Somebody who is non-technical, mm-hmm. who can read about these disruptive technologies, there's going to be a huge demand. There already is a huge demand for people around change management and helping organizations cope with the change. And that's a high EQ versus IQ, emotional intelligence versus intellectual intelligence. Somebody who can help organizations go through that change. It could be everything from training to talking to people to inspiring people. So it's not just a lot of nerds sitting in computer rooms doing things. There's obviously those jobs will exist, but you have to really give this some thought, which is why we want to expose people to a lot of conversations around this topic so they can see where is there a gap that's required and what can I go do? How do I take my aptitude and my attitude and apply it to a position where I can be a winner? I would be surprised if you had the attitude that you couldn't find something to go do unless you really had some problems. But I think most people could do it. I just think you need to be honest about what you can do.
Mm-hmm. I think just tinkering and experimenting with some of these tools, or even free tools that are available today, will go a long way to get yourself into more of like a do-it-yourself mentality. And mm-hmm. I think those people are the ones that are valuable to quote-unquote digital organization, right? Mm-hmm. So it's no longer, I'm going to go study this, get a degree, maybe get a postgraduate degree, and then I'm going to have a career in this field, maybe doing some of the same work for 20, 30, 40 years. Mm-hmm. It's more so you need to be adaptive to say, hey, I have the aptitude and the passion, the attitude to say, hey, if there's a broad problem with ambiguous instructions,
Yeah.
I am able to pull together the tools, methodologies, and the different blocks needed to solve that issue. And having that ability comes with just trying new things, experimenting.
Yeah.
Right.
Yep.
Not just going deep in one area, but being broad.
Yeah. And it's that acceptance of not it's that can-do attitude, right? It's not a case of, I don't know how to do this. It's, I don't know how to do this, but I'll figure it out. And I think that skill has always been valuable,
Yes.
but now it's
Because a lot of those lateral movements you can make into different sorts of jobs that
Yeah.
wouldn't be related.
And because the churn of relevance for some of these technologies and industries are
Right.
going to be changing and really getting more and more compressed, you're not competing with people who have decades more experience than you do.
Right.
Right,
And you
so-
see that in some of the jobs that get posted, right? Like SVP of technology.
Right, and that's a new thing.
Can't be older than 31 or
So
something
you
like that.
you can you enter the market and you are now competitive with the larger set of people. I mean, as long you have a chance at any point as these disruptions occur to be ahead of the pack. You're not constantly chasing someone else who was a great years ago.
Yeah, I think that's a crucial point. You could read about this stuff right now and you could become an expert with a month's worth of hard reading and understanding as some of these guys in the space, which is the opportunity, right? Versus the threat.
Yeah, I'll go back to the attitude and aptitude. One of the attitude issues is you have to be a curious person.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if all this stuff bores you, then you're not likely to be able to apply the amount of effort required to power up in this space. But I would just say this: people who are interested are interesting, and
Right.
interesting people will end up on the winner side of this fence. Now, again, there'll be lots of debates as to will it be a 50-50 split, or it'll be, but yeah, I tend to think there'll be few winners and lots more losers. But I want to encourage as many people that I come in contact with to come out on the winner side. And I think the first step is to become aware of all these things and don't assume that what's coming is going to look like the rearview mirror. The fact that it's digital and not analog allows it to scale at a pace that makes it very hard for people to adapt. And we've talked about in one of our case studies that's actually going to be in our book about how fast Blockbuster went out of business, the video rental store. They had like 65,000 employees, I think, if memory serves. And they went bankrupt in months once Netflix decided to start streaming their service. And because once Netflix figured out the streaming, they didn't have to build out the stores. If you have to build out stores and compete with Blockbuster on Blockbuster terms, getting permits, building buildings, hiring people, getting staff, that takes time, takes years. Whereas if I all of a sudden I just stream it and I figure that out, boom, it's available.
And it's not just the digitization. So that's a great example where this was an analog service. I had to physically distribute DVDs. Before that, Blockbuster VHS tapes, and keep going back. And it's finally digitized. It's something that we can stream, and it's purely ones and zeros, and it goes at, really the only limit, the speed of light. But there's also, digital is even, broader than that. It can go to what can scale exponentially, right? So take another trend that we talk about a lot, 3D printing, right? So that job in and of itself is a physical task where we're creating something in the analog realm. Why that's a highly scalable, exponential digital trend, digital technology, is because I would say, you guys can argue with this, but I think it's the standardization of the assembly approach, which can then propagate instantly throughout the network, so that the information is what is scalable and what can be seamlessly sent around the world to someone else who has a machine, and then they can create something if they have the right raw materials.
Yeah. So you can take whatever design and architect for that mold you're making, and you can propagate that through
standardization.
Right, through standardization, for sure. So I guess just on a kind of closing point, how much of this do you think, as well, we've talked a lot about the personal level and how you can personally kind of compete in this realm. How much of this do you think is a kind of responsibility for CEOs and leaders of organization in terms of helping to reskill their existing, workforce and talent pool into being able to compete in this new paradigm. Obviously, automation will definitely remove jobs, but it will create opportunities within companies. How much of it do you think is their responsibility? Obviously, a lot's going to rest on the people themselves, but it's a challenge.
When you get into social responsibility with public CEOs, I think it's a lot of talk, right? Their responsibility is a fiduciary one to their shareholders. I think when you get into the political realm or the academic side, then it's a different issue on a public policy basis. But back to CEOs, their interest is they want to retrain their people because it's a lot easier to retrain your people, and especially the ones who have the capabilities to do this, the aptitude, and put them into sort of your digital frontiers, than to go hire this. Go try to hire a data science today. Go try to hire somebody in cybersecurity. Go try to hire somebody who's an automation deployment expert. They're very hard to find, and they're extremely expensive. It's much easier to train somebody to do that. So when we do our consulting gigs, as an example, we talk about two aspects. There's the aspect of saving money, and we'll use the phrase defense. So defensive, you'll save money, be more efficient, and all those things are true. But then there's an offensive capability that says, I'm going to create new capabilities with the people that I have and create new revenue and business opportunities. And so that's not an obligation or responsibility. I would say it's an opportunity for CEOs to think about, what if their people had an extra 10 or 15 hours a week? What would you do with it? And I would say this, to me, I would look to the CEO to be responsible for having the vision to inspire the people to come up with that answer versus making it top down. I think the companies that are going to be successful, I think there was a great quote from Steve Jobs that I remember reading on one of these memes that went around the Twitter sphere. And it said, we don't tell people what to do, we hire smart people and they tell us what to do. And it's an attitude that you don't often see in corporate America. Typically the person who has the most stripes, the biggest paycheck, when they walk in the room, their opinion is what rules, as opposed to a different point of view that says, let's let the best ideas move forth. So I think it's the challenge of the CEOs for them to inspire their people to answer the question, what would you do with the extra time? And if there is no answer, then it's going to end up, you're going to end up employing less people as your business model shifts to a more digital footprint. But I think the opportunities for offensive adjustments, which is moving your people into new realms, I think we're just beginning to understand that and tap into that. And that's what we're trying to do with our engagements with our clients now, is to engage in a conversation that helps them think that through. What if your people had more time, and we could get rid of the mundane part of the work? Because that's going to create initially a lot more winners. I think the losers at a macro level manifest later. There'll be some short-term losers, but I think for the most part, the losers manifest much later in this curve. I've been looking at this for 5, 6, 7 years now. I would have thought it would have come faster, and I was wrong. And so I have to step back and temper my expectations about how fast this is going to happen. I will say the number of winners have come just like we thought, but the what I'll call the loser wave, that's probably years off. McKinsey wrote an excellent white paper back in 2013 from the McKinsey Global Institute, and they predicted in 10 years it would impact a huge portion of the economy. Now, they haven't updated that forecast, but I would suggest they were probably a little bit more aggressive on the impact side. It'll probably take a little bit longer.
They were saying at 2013, their projection was for 2025, and they were talking about in the order of trillions the impact that automation would have. So I'd be curious. It would be good if they revisited that number to say.
I thought it was 2023.
2023? Oh, so even less than that. Okay.
Yeah, and I keep on top of that because that was a seminal paper that informed my thinking. And I just don't think it's going to happen that fast. It might. And again, it's a parlor game to predict. And when is it going to happen?
Yeah.
Well, I don't even know what it is, for one. It's happening. And arguing about the rate of it is a parlor game. Mm-hmm. And the more time we have, the more time we have to adjust. And that's where we want to get out. Because my objective would be to have as many people that come in contact with us to be winners, so that we become valuable to them and we are a net asset to the people we interact with.
It seems like there's going to be a couple of philosophies that need to change in the IT world for this to really propagate. I mean, so you'll see a business be progressive and thinking forward, and they'll invest in some technology and then implement it. But there's still this paradigm of we're going to advance our ERP, or we're going to deploy some new technology, and then there's always this notion of being done. We're going to be maybe standardized across a couple regions, and we just redefined our processes, and we're streamlined now, and then we're done. There needs to be a change in the way we design things, a way that we approach design thinking, so that you design services, you design your technological footprint so that they're adaptable and flexible and not prone to disruption. Mm-hmm. A lot of the issues we come across with our clients, we could be talking about a technology deployment, new contracting for services, talking about those commercial models, but a lot of it is stemming from the fact that they cannot adjust in iterative motions.
Yeah.
So they're stuck in the mud from before because they were not forward thinking enough. They were, at one point it was great, and they just signed a new contract and we have this new technology, but that quickly becomes obsolete and it becomes old news.
Yeah.
So if you can design for change so that change is the new normal, it's never, oh, we're done now. Mm-hmm. That philosophy, if that propagates, especially in the IT world, I think you'll see some of these spot deployments of automation, of AI, all this stuff that grabs the headlines. You'll see that to start propagate throughout organizations and entire industries.
Yeah. And certainly some of the COEs that you guys have helped setting up is kind of a first step for a lot of these companies to set up an area that can help kind of spread that speed of deployment and agile nature to the work that they do with some of these new technologies. So, yeah.
So Rohan, we have a meetup coming up. What's the date of that?
So 23rd of January, Wednesday the 23rd of January. It starts at 6:30 p.m. We've got a few snacks, some drinks. Everyone can mingle, some good networking.
And that'll be at Spaces in Hudson Yards?
Spaces in Hudson Yards.
In Manhattan?
In Manhattan, yep.
Great.
So it's going to be really good, really interesting topic. We'll expand on this and have Rob's insight. He's an IBM fellow and has lived and breathed this stuff, so it's going to be interesting to hear from him.
Yeah, he was at our last meetup, and we went to the. He came to us with in the Pilsner House in Hoboken for drinks one night.
Yep,
I hung out with him for a little bit. So looking forward to that discussion. Encourage people that listen to us and are in the New York area to come join us. You can go to the meetup page in our show notes. You'll see where that is. Mm-hmm. So thanks, guys. Any parting comments?
All good here.
Just a couple of housekeeping things. I want to thank Bart and Jordan for building out the studio here. We're fully functional here right now. Everything else we're doing is just aesthetic. We're going to put a couple tables in here and maybe change out the lights and
lava lamps.
The lava lamp is on the stairs.
Sensory deprivation tank.
I forgot to bring it down, but I failed to mention that in the prior shows we haven't turned on the Himalayan salt lamp. I have it on full blast right now.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Now we're really in the zone.
I felt the difference too.
I thought this episode was much better than the others.
Yeah, I think it's I'm going to attribute it
more
to
centered.
the Himalayan salt lamp. I feel better. And also thanks to Rohan for getting the marketing done on this and getting this out on SoundCloud and iTunes, etc. We look forward to people giving us our feedback, and thanks very much.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks.
Hey, thanks for listening to the show today, Pardon the Disruption. If you enjoyed our discussion, I'd invite you to head over to our homepage at www.rumjog.com. You can go there and check out our perspectives page and hear more podcast episodes, read some articles. It's some pretty interesting stuff. You can get access also to our Digital Disruption series. This is a meetup that we do mostly in New York and New Jersey area, where we discuss the impact of these technologies on our society and the way we live and work. We do this alongside of industry experts in various fields like crowdsourcing, automation, and blockchain, the technologies that are disrupting our world today. Anyway, if you like that, you can also follow us on social media at Twitter on the handle @Rumjog. We look forward to hearing more from you. Thank you.